The sky over the Bismarck Sea burned in shades of orange and crimson as Lieutenant Jack Archer pressed his gloved hand against the cold metal frame of his Bristol Beaufighter. The twin-engine aircraft sat on the makeshift airstrip at Milne Bay, its dark green camouflage paint chipped and scarred from countless missions. Around him, the humid air clung to everything, thick, oppressive, smelling of aviation fuel, wet earth, and the distant salt of the ocean. Jack was 23 years old, though his eyes carried the weight of someone much older. His uniform was stained with sweat and oil. A photograph tucked inside his breast pocket showed a young woman with auburn hair standing in front of a Sydney harbor. Her name was Margaret. They were supposed to be married last December. That was before the war came to Australia's doorstep. "Oi, Archer, you daydreaming again?" The voice belonged to Sergeant Tommy Reed, Jack's navigator and closest friend since flight school. Tommy was shorter, stockier, with a crooked smile that never quite left his face, even here, even now. He climbed up beside Jack, checking the ammunition belts feeding into the 4 20mm Hispano cannons mounted in the Beaufighter's nose. "Just thinking," Jack replied quietly. "Dangerous habit, mate." Tommy patted the aircraft's fuselage. "Save the thinking for after we get back. Right now, we've got a job to do." Jack nodded, though his chest felt tight. Intelligence reports had come in 2 hours ago. A Japanese convoy was moving south through the Bismarck Sea under the cover of approaching dusk. 8 transport ships escorted by destroyers, carrying thousands of troops and supplies destined for the imperial bases in New Guinea. If that convoy reached its destination, the entire Allied position in the Southwest Pacific could collapse, and High Command had ordered the Royal Australian Air Force to stop them. The briefing had been tense. Squadron Leader Morrison stood before the assembled pilots, his face grim beneath the flickering kerosene lamp. "Gentlemen, the Japanese commanders don't believe we have the capability or the courage to strike at dusk. They think we're too cautious, too inexperienced. They've been laughing at us." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Tonight we proved them wrong." 12 Beaufighters would take off in staggered formations. Their mission, low-level attack runs at wave-top height, using the fading light and the element of surprise to cripple the convoy before nightfall. It was dangerous. Suicidal, some whispered. The Japanese destroyers bristled with anti-aircraft guns, and their Zero fighters patrolled the skies like hawks. But there was no choice. This was total war, and every moment counted. Jack climbed into the cockpit, settling into the worn leather seat. The instrument panel glowed faintly in the dimming light. Tommy squeezed into the navigator's position behind him, already checking maps and coordinates. "All set back there?" Jack asked through the intercom. "Ready as I'll ever be," Tommy replied. "Let's give 'em hell, Jack." The engines roared to life, twin Bristol Hercules radials coughing black smoke before settling into a deep, steady growl. The sound vibrated through Jack's chest, drowning out everything else. One by one, the Beaufighters taxied onto the strip, their propellers spinning silver discs in the twilight. Jack's hands moved automatically across the controls. Throttle forward, tailwheel up. The aircraft surged down the runway, faster, faster, then lifted into the air with a shudder. The jungle fell away beneath them, replaced by the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean, darkening as the sun dipped lower. They flew in tight formation, skimming just above the waves to avoid enemy radar. The air was turbulent this close to the water, and Jack fought to keep the Beaufighter steady. Saltwater spray misted the windscreen. His heart pounded in his ears, louder than the engines. 15 minutes passed. 20. The sky turned from orange to deep violet. Shadows stretched across the water like grasping fingers. Then Tommy's voice crackled over the intercom. "Contact! 11 o'clock, 5 miles out." Jack squinted through the canopy. At first, he saw nothing. Then, there, dark shapes on the horizon. The convoy. 8 massive transport ships flanked by sleek destroyers, their silhouettes stark against the dying light. Smoke trails rose from their funnels, black against the purple sky. "Targets confirmed," Morrison's voice came through the radio. "All aircraft, prepare for attack run. Stay low, stay fast, and remember, make every round count." Jack's breath came shallow now. His hands tightened on the control yoke. Behind him, Tommy was silent, focused. The Beaufighters dropped even lower, mere feet above the churning waves. Spray lashed against the metal skin of the aircraft. The convoy grew larger, closer. Jack could see figures moving on the decks of the transport ships. Soldiers, sailors, men who didn't yet know death was screaming toward them at 300 miles per hour. He thought of Margaret. He thought of home. He thought of the laughter of enemy commanders who believed the Australians were too afraid to fight at dusk. "Steady," Jack whispered to himself. "Steady." The lead destroyer opened fire. Tracer rounds arced into the sky like deadly fireflies. Brilliant, beautiful, terrifying. The air exploded with flak bursts. Jack banked hard right, feeling the G-force press him into his seat. An explosion flashed to his left. One of the Beaufighters had taken a direct hit, spinning into the sea in a ball of flame. "Stay with me, Tommy," Jack shouted. "I'm here, mate! I'm here!" They closed the distance. 500 yards. 300. The transport ships loomed massive now, their steel hulls rising like cliffs. Jack lined up the largest vessel in his gun sight, his finger hovering over the cannon trigger. 200 yards. 100. "Now!" Jack squeezed the trigger. The 420mm cannons erupted in a deafening roar, spitting fire and steel. The Beaufighter shook violently as hundreds of rounds tore into the transport ship's hull. Metal shredded. Windows shattered. Fires bloomed across the deck. He pulled up hard, barely clearing the ship's superstructure, the heat from the flames washing over the cockpit. Behind him, Tommy whooped, half relief, half terror. But they weren't done. More ships ahead, more targets, more fire. The sky burned, the sea burned, and in that moment, as Jack Archer banked his Beaufighter for another pass, he understood with terrible clarity what war truly was. Not glory, not honor, just survival. And the desperate hope that when dawn came, you'd still be alive to see it. The world became a nightmare of fire and metal. Jack pulled the Beaufighter into a tight banking turn, his muscles straining against the G-forces that threatened to drag consciousness from his mind. Below, the ocean reflected the burning convoy like a broken mirror, orange flames dancing on black water. The acrid smell of cordite and burning fuel seeped through every crack in the cockpit, mixing with his own sweat. "Second transport dead ahead," Tommy's voice cut through the chaos. "Bearing 020. Jack didn't respond with words. He couldn't. His entire being had narrowed to a single purpose: survive the next 10 seconds, then the next 10 after that. The Beaufighter screamed across the waves at full throttle, so low that the propeller wash kicked up plumes of spray behind them. The second transport ship grew in his vision, a massive steel beast crawling through the twilight. Its deck swarmed with activity. Soldiers scattered like ants. Anti-aircraft guns swiveled toward him, their barrels tracking his approach with mechanical precision. "They see us!" Tommy shouted. Tracer fire erupted from the ship's gun emplacements, brilliant streams of light that cut through the dusk like deadly ribbons. Jack jinked left, then right, the aircraft responding to his touch like a living thing. Rounds whistled past the canopy, so close he could hear them over the engine roar. His thumb found the cannon trigger. The 420mm Hispanos thundered again, the recoil shaking the entire airframe. He walked his fire along the ship's waterline, watching steel buckle and tear under the devastating impact. Explosions rippled along the hull as ammunition stores detonated. Men dove for cover. Others didn't move at all. Jack's stomach twisted, but his hand stayed steady. "Good hits! Good hits!" Tommy's voice carried something between excitement and horror. They roared over the transport at masthead height, close enough to see faces on the deck, eyes wide with terror, mouths open in screams Jack couldn't hear over his engines. Then they were past, climbing hard to avoid the destroyer waiting on the far side. Break right! Break right! Jack threw the Beaufighter into a violent turn. A wall of flak burst exactly where they would have been, black clouds of shrapnel filling the air. The aircraft shuddered as fragments peppered the fuselage, sharp metallic pings like deadly rain. "We're hit!" Tommy called. "Port wing, but we're still flying." Jack glanced left. Holes punched through the wing's metal skin, ragged tears that leaked hydraulic fluid in thin streams. But the control surfaces still responded. The engines still roared. They were alive. For now. Around them, the battle had become absolute chaos. Beaufighters crisscrossed the sky at wave-top height, their cannons blazing in the failing light. 2 more transport ships burned, listing heavily as water poured through shattered hulls. The destroyers had formed a protective circle, their anti-aircraft guns creating a dome of steel and fire that seemed impossible to penetrate. But the Australians kept coming. Flight Lieutenant Davies's aircraft made a suicidal run straight down the throat of a destroyer's main armament. His cannons raked the ship's superstructure, silencing 2 gun positions before flak caught his starboard engine. It exploded in a shower of sparks and burning oil. Davies fought to keep the crippled Beaufighter airborne, black smoke trailing behind him as he limped away toward home. He wouldn't make it. Jack knew it. Davies probably knew it too. "Morrison's going in again," Tommy reported, his voice tight. "Third transport." Jack spotted their squadron leader's aircraft diving toward the largest remaining transport, a massive vessel that dwarfed everything around it. Morrison's approach was textbook perfect, his timing flawless. The cannons opened up, ripping into the ship's bridge with devastating accuracy. Then a zero dropped out of the clouds. "Morrison, 6 o'clock high!" The warning came too late. The Japanese fighter, sleek, fast, deadly, had been waiting above the clouds for exactly this moment. Its machine guns blazed, stitching a line of destruction across Morrison's Beaufighter. The cockpit canopy shattered, the port engine erupted in flames. Morrison's aircraft rolled inverted and plunged into the sea. No parachute, no survivors. The radio exploded with voices, anger, grief, determination. Squadron leader Morrison was gone, but the mission wasn't over. Someone, Jack thought it was Flight Lieutenant Patterson, took command, his voice cutting through the chaos with practiced authority. "All aircraft, this is Patterson. Morrison would want us to finish this. 4th and 5th transports are still operational. We take them down. Now!" Jack's hands were shaking. He gripped the control yoke tighter, forcing steadiness into muscles that wanted to tremble. Margaret's photograph pressed against his chest. He thought of her smile, her laugh, the way she'd looked at him the last time they were together. He thought of Morrison's aircraft hitting the water. He thought of Davies' smoking engine. He thought of the 12 crews that had taken off from Milne Bay. How many would make it back? "Jack." Tommy's voice was quiet now, almost gentle. "We need to make another run." "I know." "We can do this, mate. Together." Jack took a deep breath. The twilight had deepened to near darkness. Stars were beginning to appear overhead, cold and distant and utterly indifferent to the violence below. The burning convoy cast long shadows across the water, creating a hellscape of light and darkness. "All right," Jack said. "One more pass, 4th transport. We go in low and fast, same as before." "Right behind you!" Jack pushed the throttles forward. The Beaufighter accelerated, damaged wing and all, racing toward the convoy for what might be the last time. The destroyer crews had learned from the previous attacks. Their flak patterns had tightened, creating kill zones that forced the Australian pilots into ever more desperate approaches. The 4th transport loomed ahead, smaller than the others, but still deadly. Jack could see its guns tracking him, could imagine the gunners behind them. Young men, probably scared, definitely determined. Men doing their duty, just like him. War made enemies of people who had no reason to hate each other. The thought flickered through his mind and vanished, replaced by pure instinct. 500 yards. 400. The flak intensified, a solid wall of death. An explosion burst to Jack's right. Another Beaufighter gone, vanished in a ball of flame. 300 yards. His finger tightened on the trigger. 200 yards. The cannons roared. The transport ship's hull erupted in fire and shattered steel. Jack held the trigger down, pouring everything he had into that one sustained burst. The ammunition counters spun down toward zero. Explosions cascaded along the ship's length as his rounds found fuel tanks, ammunition stores, engine rooms. Then they were through, climbing hard, banking away from the inferno they'd created. Tommy was laughing, a sound edged with hysteria and relief. "We got it, Jack. We bloody well got it." Jack said nothing. His hands trembled on the controls. His heart hammered against his ribs. Below, the fourth transport ship rolled onto its side, water pouring into its torn hull. Men leaped from the deck into the burning sea. Patterson's voice came through the radio, calm despite everything. "All aircraft, that's 4 transports destroyed, 2 heavily damaged. Mission accomplished. Return to base. I repeat, return to base." Jack turned the Beaufighter toward home. Around him the surviving aircraft formed up. 7 Beaufighters out of 12. 5 crews lost. Morrison gone. Davies somewhere in the dark. Maybe alive. Maybe not. The sun had disappeared completely now. Only the burning convoy provided light, a funeral pyre for thousands of men on both sides. Jack flew through the darkness, every mile feeling like 100. The damaged wing groaned under stress. Fuel gauges read lower than he liked, but they were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. "Tommy?" "Yeah, mate?" "When we get back, I need to write some letters." Tommy understood. Letters to the families of men who wouldn't return. Letters that began with, "I regret to inform you," and ended with words that could never truly express the cost of this terrible war. "We'll write them together," Tommy said softly. The Australian coast appeared on the horizon, a thin, dark line against the stars. Milne Bay waited somewhere in that darkness, its runway lit by lanterns for the returning crews. Jack descended toward home, knowing that tomorrow they would fly again. Tomorrow, there would be another mission, another battle, another chance to die. But tonight, he was alive. And somewhere out there, the Japanese commanders weren't laughing anymore. The landing was the hardest part. Jack's hands moved automatically across the controls, but exhaustion had settled into his bones like lead. The damaged Beaufighter shuddered and groaned with every adjustment, the port wing's torn metal singing a discordant song through the night air. Below, Milne Bay's runway appeared as a thin strip of lantern light cutting through absolute darkness, a fragile thread of hope in an ocean of black. "Gear down," Jack announced, his voice hoarse. The hydraulic system whined in protest. One green light appeared on the panel, then another. The third flickered, uncertain. "Port gear's not locked," Tommy said quietly. "We might have a problem." Jack's jaw tightened. After everything they'd survived, the flak, the fire, the nightmare run through the convoy, they might crash on their own runway. The irony wasn't lost on him. "We don't have fuel for another approach," Jack said. "We're committed." "Then let's bring her home, mate." Jack lined up the approach, fighting the crosswind that tried to push them off course. The Beaufighter descended through the humid night air, past the palm trees that lined the strip, past the skeleton crews waiting with fire extinguishers and medical supplies. His world narrowed to the dim lights ahead, to the feel of the control yoke in his hands, to the rhythm of his own breathing. 50 feet, 30, 20. The wheels kissed the packed earth runway with a jarring thump. The port gear groaned but held. Jack applied the brakes, feeling the aircraft slow, finally rolling to a stop near the end of the strip. For a moment, neither man moved. They sat in the darkness of the cockpit, listening to the engines tick as they cooled, listening to their own hearts gradually slow to something approaching normal. "We made it," Tommy whispered. "Christ, Jack, we actually made it." Jack nodded, unable to speak. His hands were trembling now, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving only exhaustion and something deeper, something that felt like grief and relief mixed together until they were indistinguishable. The ground crew swarmed the Beaufighter the moment they climbed down. Flashlights played across the damaged wing, illuminating the holes punched through metal, the hydraulic fluid still dripping onto the ground, the scorch marks from near-miss flak bursts. "Good Lord," one of the mechanics breathed. "How did you fly this thing home?" Jack didn't answer. He walked away on unsteady legs, Tommy beside him, both men silent as they crossed the airstrip toward the operations tent. Around them, other crews were arriving, some walking normally, others supported by medics, a few carried on stretchers. 7 aircraft had returned. 5 were missing: Squadron Leader Morrison, Flight Lieutenant Davies. 3 other crews, men Jack had shared meals with, laughed with, complained about the heat and the food and the endless waiting between missions. Gone. All of them gone in less than an hour. The operations tent glowed with lamplight. Inside, Flight Lieutenant Patterson stood by a makeshift table covered in maps and reports. His face was drawn, aged 10 years in a single evening. He looked up as Jack and Tommy entered, and something like relief crossed his features. "Archer. Reed. Good to see you both." Patterson's voice carried the weight of command, steady, professional, but underneath it all, profoundly tired. "Debrief in 5 minutes, get some water, catch your breath." Jack accepted a canteen from one of the communications officers and drank deeply. The water tasted of metal and chemicals, but it was wet and cool, and he drained half the canteen before stopping. Beside him, Tommy had found a chair and collapsed into it, his hand shaking as he tried to light a cigarette. Other pilots filtered in: Lieutenant Cooper, his face blackened with smoke; Sergeant Willis, blood seeping through a bandage on his arm; Flight Officer Thompson, who looked too young to be here, too young to have seen what they'd all seen tonight. Patterson called the debrief to order. His summary was concise, professional, stripped of emotion. 4 transport ships confirmed destroyed. 2 more heavily damaged and likely to sink. Thousands of enemy troops and tons of supplies lost. The convoy had been shattered, its mission a complete failure. The cost? 5 Beaufighters, 10 men, maybe more if Davies had gone down somewhere in the dark. Initial reports suggest the Japanese command was caught completely off guard. Patterson continued. They didn't believe we had the capability for a Dusk attack at that range. They underestimated us. And someone laughed, a bitter sound without humor. They won't make that mistake again. No, Patterson agreed. They won't, which means tomorrow will be harder, and the day after that harder still. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled pilots. But tonight, you proved something important. You proved that the Royal Australian Air Force can strike anywhere, anytime, regardless of what the enemy thinks is possible. You proved that Australian pilots are second to none. The words should have felt triumphant. Instead, they settled over the room like a heavy blanket, smothering rather than warming. Patterson dismissed them. The pilots dispersed slowly, drifting toward their tents or the mess area or simply out into the night, each man seeking his own way to process what had happened. Jack found himself walking toward the beach. The ocean stretched before him, invisible in the darkness but present in the rhythmic crash of waves against sand. The smell of salt and jungle flowers mixed with the lingering scent of aviation fuel that clung to his uniform. Tommy appeared beside him, still working on that cigarette. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the invisible horizon. "Morrison was a good man," Tommy said finally. "Yeah. He had a family back in Perth, 2 daughters." Jack closed his eyes. 2 little girls who would grow up without a father. A wife who would receive a telegram and know instantly, before she even opened it, that her world had ended. "I keep thinking about them," Jack said quietly. "The Japanese sailors, the soldiers on those transports, they were just doing their job, same as us. War doesn't care about that." "I know. Doesn't make it easier." Tommy took a long drag on his cigarette, the ember glowing orange in the darkness. "You remember what Morrison told us? First day of training?" Jack remembered. Morrison had gathered all the new pilots and looked at them with those steady gray eyes and said, "Flying is the easy part, gentlemen. Living with what you have to do while flying, that's the hard part. That's what will haunt you long after the engines stop." He'd been right. "We should write those letters," Tommy said. "Morrison's family, Davies's mother, the others." "Tomorrow," Jack promised. "Tonight I just need to—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Tommy understood. They stood on the beach for a long time, two young men carrying weights far too heavy for their years. Above them, stars wheeled through their ancient patterns, uncaring and eternal. Somewhere out there in the darkness, the burning convoy still lit the ocean. Somewhere out there, men were dying, drowning, calling for mothers and wives and gods who seemed very far away. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out Margaret's photograph. Even in the darkness, he could picture her face, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the way she'd looked at him the day he left for training. "When this is over," he said softly, "I'm going to marry her, going to find a little house somewhere quiet, going to have a normal life where the biggest decision is what to have for dinner." "Sounds nice. You'll be there, won't you? Best man?" Tommy smiled, a real smile this time. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, mate." They both knew it might not happen. They both knew that tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, one or both of them might not come back. The odds were against them. Every mission was a roll of dice with death. But tonight, standing on a beach in New Guinea with the ocean breathing in the darkness, they could pretend. They could imagine a future beyond the war, beyond the fire and steel and endless violence. They could hope. Behind them, the operations tent still glowed. Mechanics worked through the night repairing damaged aircraft. Intelligence officers compiled reports that would be sent up the chain of command, analyzed, used to plan the next mission. The war machine ground on, indifferent to individual lives, individual dreams. Jack turned away from the ocean. His shoulders ached. His eyes burned with exhaustion. But there would be time to rest later. Right now, there were letters to write, duties to fulfill, memories to honor. "Come on," he said to Tommy. "Let's go back." They walked together across the sand, two shadows among many, two survivors carrying the weight of those who hadn't survived. The night wrapped around them like a cloak, hiding their faces, hiding their tears, hiding the scars that would never quite heal. Tomorrow the sun would rise. Tomorrow there would be another briefing, another mission, another chance to prove that the Japanese commander's laughter had been premature. But tonight belonged to the fallen. Tonight belonged to memory. And in the darkness of Milne Bay, Jack Archer made a silent promise to every man who'd flown into that dusk and never returned. Their sacrifice would not be forgotten. Their courage would not fade. As long as he lived, he would remember. Jack didn't sleep. He sat at the small wooden desk in his tent, a single kerosene lamp casting shadows that danced like ghosts across canvas walls. Before him lay 5 blank sheets of paper, a fountain pen, and the impossible task of finding words that could somehow ease the pain of loss. "Dear Mrs. Morrison, I am writing to you about your husband, Squadron Leader Robert Morrison." His hand trembled. The pen leaked a small blot of ink onto the page. Jack stared at it, watching the dark stain spread through the fibers, like blood in water, like oil on the ocean, like all the things he couldn't unsee. "How did you tell a woman her husband was gone? How did you explain that his sacrifice meant something while simultaneously acknowledging that nothing could justify the hole torn in her life? How did you write about heroism when all you could see was fire and falling aircraft and the terrible silence that followed?" Jack crumpled the paper and started again. Outside, the camp was stirring. He could hear mechanics already working on aircraft, their tools clanking in the pre-dawn darkness. Voices drifted past, tired, subdued, carrying none of yesterday's nervous energy. Everyone had changed. The mission had changed them. Tommy appeared in the tent opening, 2 cups of bitter coffee in his hands. He set one beside Jack without speaking, then sat on his bunk, watching his friend struggle with words that wouldn't come. "I can't do this," Jack said finally. "Every word feels like a lie." "Then write the truth." "The truth?" Jack's laugh was hollow. "The truth is that Morrison flew straight into hell because someone decided those transport ships were worth more than his life. The truth is that his daughters will never remember his face. The truth is that we're all going to end up the same way if this war keeps going." "Maybe," Tommy said quietly, "but that's not the whole truth, is it?" Jack looked up, meeting his friend's eyes. "Morrison knew the risks," Tommy continued. "We all do. But he flew anyway because he believed it mattered. Because he believed that stopping that convoy would save Australian lives. Maybe even save Australia itself. That's the truth his family needs to hear." Jack stared at the blank page. Then slowly, carefully, he began to write. "Dear Mrs. Morrison, your husband flew with courage and honor until his final moment. He led us through impossible odds, and because of him, we succeeded. Because of him, thousands of our countrymen will live to see another day. His sacrifice was not in vain. I wish I could offer more comfort. I wish I could bring him home to you. All I can offer is this promise. We will remember him. Every flight, every mission, we will remember what he taught us and why he fought. He spoke of you and your daughters often. You were his strength. With deepest sympathy, Lieutenant Jack Archer." The words weren't enough. They would never be enough. But they were honest, and perhaps honesty was all he could give. He wrote 4 more letters as the sky outside began to lighten from black to deep blue. Each one was different, personal, filled with specific memories of men who had been more than just names on a roster. By the time he finished, his hand ached, and tears had left small water stains on the final page. Tommy had fallen asleep on his bunk, still fully dressed. Jack covered him with a blanket, then stepped outside into the gathering dawn. The air was cool, almost pleasant before the tropical heat arrived. Jack walked through the camp, past rows of tents and parked vehicles, past the operations center where Patterson was already awake, studying maps for the next mission. There would always be a next mission. He found himself at the edge of the airstrip where the surviving Beaufighters sat in a line, battered, patched, but ready. Mechanics had worked through the night, welding torn metal, replacing damaged components, preparing these machines for another dance with death. Jack approached his aircraft. In the growing light, the damage looked even worse than he'd remembered. Dozens of holes peppered the fuselage. The port wing had been hastily repaired with mismatched metal plates. Hydraulic fluid stained the ground beneath it like dark blood. But it had brought him home. Against all odds, it had brought him home. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Jack turned to find Chief Mechanic Sullivan approaching, wiping his oil-stained hands on an equally stained rag. Sullivan was in his 40s, too old for combat flying, but too skilled to be anywhere else. He'd kept these Beaufighters flying through conditions that would have grounded any sensible Air Force. "She's held together with prayers and spare parts," Jack said. "The best kind of aircraft." Sullivan patted the fuselage affectionately. "She'll fly again." "They all will. We don't give up easy." Jack thought about those words. We don't give up easy. It was more than just Australian pride or stubbornness. It was survival. It was defiance. It was looking at impossible odds and saying, "Not today." "Sullivan," Jack asked quietly, "how many more missions do you think we can fly before the odds catch up?" The older man was silent for a long moment. Then he shrugged. "One more than we have to, Lieutenant. One more than we have to." The sun broke the horizon, a flood of gold and crimson that painted the clouds in shades of fire. Jack watched it rise, this star that cared nothing for human conflict, that would shine long after this war, and every war became dust and fading memory. But right now, in this moment, that sunrise meant something. It meant they had survived the night, It meant there was still time to make a difference, to honor the fallen, to perhaps somehow help end this terrible thing. By 0700 hours, the pilots were assembled for morning briefing. Patterson stood before them, looking only slightly more rested than the night before. Behind him, reconnaissance photographs showed the results of yesterday's attack. The convoy was destroyed. 4 transports completely sunk. 2 more beached and burning. The remaining vessels had scattered, their mission abandoned. Intelligence estimated over 3,000 enemy troops lost, along with critical supplies and equipment. "The Japanese command has issued a statement," Patterson said. "They're calling it the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. They're describing it as a minor setback." Someone snorted. "Minor setback? We sent them to the bottom of the ocean?" "Yes," Patterson agreed. "And that's precisely why they won't admit the truth. Because admitting the truth means admitting they underestimated us, means admitting that a small force of Australian pilots accomplished what they thought was impossible." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled men. "But here's what matters. They're not laughing anymore. Every Japanese commander in the Pacific now knows that the RAAF can strike anywhere, any time, with devastating effect. They know we're not going to just sit back and let them take this region without a fight." Patterson's voice grew stronger. "Morrison and the others didn't die for nothing. They died pushing back against an enemy that thought we were too afraid, too inexperienced, too weak to matter. They proved them wrong, and we're going to keep proving them wrong every single day until this war is over." The words should have rallied them. Instead, they settled over the room like a weight, not crushing, but heavy with responsibility. This wasn't about glory or revenge. It was about survival, about protecting homes and families and a future that seemed impossibly distant. Jack felt Tommy's hand on his shoulder, a brief touch, a reminder that they were in this together. "Dismissed," Patterson said. "Next briefing at 1400 hours. Rest while you can." Jack returned to his tent and finally allowed himself to lie down. Exhaustion crashed over him like a wave, pulling him under before he could resist. His sleep was fitful, filled with dreams of burning ships and falling aircraft, and Morrison's Beaufighter rolling inverted into dark water. He woke to find Margaret's photograph on his chest where it had fallen from his pocket. He picked it up carefully, studying her face in the afternoon light filtering through the tent. "I'm still here," he whispered to the photograph. "I don't know how, but I'm still here." And he was, damaged, haunted, carrying ghosts that would never quite leave him, but alive. Still capable of feeling, of hoping, of imagining that distant future where the war was just a terrible memory and life could be simple again. Tommy stirred on his bunk. "You talking to yourself, mate?" "Just making promises I hope I can keep. Best kind of promises." They prepared for the afternoon briefing together, checking their gear with the automatic movements of men who'd done this too many times. But something had shifted. The nervous energy was gone, replaced by something harder, more durable. They had faced the worst and survived. They had proven themselves. The Japanese commanders weren't laughing anymore. And Jack Archer, standing in a tent on a small airstrip in New Guinea, understood with crystal clarity what the rest of this war would demand of him. More missions, more losses, more impossible odds overcome through skill and courage and blind luck, but also more sunrises, more letters home, more moments of quiet connection with men who understood what couldn't be spoken, more reasons to keep fighting, keep flying, keep believing that somehow, someday, they would all go home. He tucked Margaret's photograph back into his pocket, picked up his flight helmet, and stepped out into the afternoon sun. The Beaufighters waited. The war waited. The future, uncertain, dangerous, but still possible, waited, and Jack Archer was ready.